Wie geht's? Kultur in Zeiten des Coronavirus. Hello everyone to another English edition of Wie geht's, a podcast of conversations with people working in the arts, cultural policy and the creative sector, reflecting on how the coronavirus crisis affects the cultural sphere. I'm Martin Sierold, Director of the Institute for Arts and Media Management at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Hamburg, Germany, which is producing this podcast. Today, I will be talking to Christer Windeløv-Lidzélius from the Danish university think tank and educational hub Kaospilot. Kaospilot is among the most essential spots where professionals from the cultural sphere look towards to build cultural leadership skills as well as pedagogical ones. They've built their brand on experience-based learning. Kaospilots are experts in designing learning experiences for groups, which have been an inspiration for many people in the arts and education. But how can experiential learning work if there's no shared experience to learn from? The title of this podcast, Wie geht's, has a double meaning. It translates simply as "How are you?" We want to know how people in the arts are doing during this extraordinary and challenging time. Yet, Wie geht's also means, how does it work? On this podcast, we hope to share fresh ideas, learnings, stories, how we learn to rethink our practices and our role for societies as we try to come to grips with this crisis. My guest today, Christer Windeløv-Lidzélius, is the principal and CEO of Kaospilot. He's led their development for close to 15 years towards being an internationally acclaimed and influential educational institution within the areas of cultural leadership and entrepreneurship. Christer serves on different boards and in think tanks. He regularly contributes with articles in media and has given speeches and doing work in more than 25 countries and holds an MBA and a PhD in the intersection of innovation, leadership and strategy. Christer Windeløv-Lidzélius is on the line. He's director and CEO of the Danish, well, that's an issue to ask him, school, university, think tank, experience-based learning space, Kaospilot in Aarhus. And I'm very happy that you found the time to talk to me. And as you know, the first question usually is asked in German, Wie geht's? So, how are you?
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I am good. Like many others, I'm in a transition from everyday normal ways of working to a more home-based office setup. But that is going to remarkably well, actually, given all the challenges that follows with the institution's work. In general, I think also for the institution, we are managing this transition quite well. So all in all, we are good.
Well, that's good news. We return to your work right now and how it's affected by the virus. But as our previous conversations have been mostly around German contexts, maybe if you can just give us a brief insight into the general picture in Denmark. What's life like in Denmark right now? How are you being affected by the virus?
So Denmark took quite a stark stance in the relatively early beginning in Northern Europe around the pandemic. So schools were closed, not just universities, but everything down to kindergartens, followed then by bars, restaurants, and so forth. And there was a general call from the Prime Minister that everyone that could should actually be at home, work from home, and have as little as possible physical contact with people that are not in the absolute closest circles. Indeed, also explicitly try to avoid spending time with elderly and vulnerable people. So if you contrast that, for instance, with the Swedish one, which has been quite the opposite, actually. Denmark has taken a very strong position on how to prevent the spread.
We'd like to focus also on the question, how is the cultural context affected by it? So maybe before we move to your work right now, if you can give a very brief insight into what is the core of Kaospilot without the coronavirus situation?
Kaospilot is ultimately a school that runs a number of activities, everything from a 3-year program to a number of professional courses, to a project space, to a cultural space, to a social space, and so forth. And if you look at from the non-virus position, so to speak, our main differentiator in all of these aspects compared with any other type of institution you can find is that our value proposition resides on the physical meeting. We are best in person. Everything we do requires that people meet. We don't do anything online, or it's such an insignificant part of what we do, so it doesn't matter up until now. So all in all, we do tremendously well, actually, before the virus. We deliver our value propositions from Australia to Canada, basically, predominantly these short-term professional courses, which ranges from experience design to leadership, to entrepreneurship, and to collaborative practices, basically. So all in all, we consider ourselves to be an education. If you need to say one word, we are a school, but we do a number of things in our work which would correspond very much to what other cultural institutions would do as well.
Yeah, and I think this stress on the interpersonal, I have experienced myself in 2 programs which I was part of, and that really changed the way I think about also higher education teaching, because a lot is about creating experiences through which and in which people can learn. And obviously, if that's the case, and that's the main asset of your contribution as a learning environment, then it must be in a way like taking away your oxygen if people cannot meet anymore. So how is your work affected right now, and what are the ideas what you're able to do at this point based on that core idea of experiential learning?
So this is very much the pending question that we are struggling with. The actual school's transition to an online works well when it comes to the specific school activities, meaning teachings, etc., etc. That has not been remarkably challenged, primarily because we have very little teaching at this particular moment in time. The students' projects, what the students do, is also, I would guess 80% of what they do is interaction with other people. And when that cannot happen in a physical space, the students' projects are dramatically challenged. So, for instance, those that are going to go up for an exam here in 1.5 months, part of that criteria depends on their ability to test and apply learning and hypothesis. If they cannot do that, how are we going to assess what they have learned? Because this is clearly the action competence is our core compared to many others that maybe have a more intellectual or reflective way to go about their exams. So, in addition, every course that we had planned to do before summer has virtually been either cancelled or postponed. There are still a few pending things around June. This has a massive impact on us in terms of finances, but it do also challenge our innovation thinking around what we do. And that I think is very interesting. So up until now, we haven't done anything that I would say is remarkably different from anyone else. But we are also offering another layer of thinking so if you look at this as a pendulum, I think many people are saying that just hope that the pendulum will return to its original position and we go back to business as normal. Nothing need to change. But the amount of changes that are initiated in order to survive now will probably not mean that we all go back to exactly how it used to be, say, in January. For instance, we invest so much now in online delivery, so it would be ludicrous not to take advantage of that even when things return to normal. In our particular way, we are really trying to find a way where the digitalization of what we do offers additional benefits and not just become a bleak copy of the physical meeting. We need to try to copy that as much as possible. We need to find something that goes beyond that. Exactly what that will be, we don't fully know yet.
Yeah, so it's a scary moment probably, but also a moment of reinventing yourself. It sounds in a way. One question that I have: you spoke about this moment after the immediate crisis, and very possibly it's not going to be back to a normal of January or the time before. And in a way, maybe one could argue that the competencies that you focus on are exactly those that everyone will need, maybe needs right now to even stay sane and survive in the crisis, but also to then be able to cope with the world afterwards. So on the one hand, there seems to be this tension of what you can contribute is so important right now, but the ways in which you contributed usually have been taken away from you. Do you see a demand of people? Are there people coming and asking for your courses right now, or what's the response you get from your networks to the content in a way of your offerings?
Yes, so we had actually a conversation about that this morning, and where we had we did a cash flow analysis and tried to look at what happens, how many people are asking for refunds for existing for courses that they've already paid for. And up until now, that has not been a dramatic thing for us. There are relatively few. Most people are more concerned about when will the course actually happen. We do have a number of requests that speaks directly into what you're pointing at. This is a turbulent time. Kaospilots is very much about navigating uncertainty and managing complexity. What can Kaospilot contribute in this aspect? So we do receive more questions that you can clearly see is a consequence of what people experience in their everyday life now. So I do think that this is pinpointing in a way something of what we are offering. Ironically, since if you take, for instance, our students thing, they do projects in the real world with the real people with the real needs. For the first time in history, all students are facing the same challenge regardless of which project they do. They cannot have the same meetings, workshops, interactions as they normally have. It will be fascinating to see how the students react to this and how they respond to this, and what reflections they do about A, finding new ways, and 2, what went better and what went worse when we do the exams later on, because for the first time in history, we have the same challenge that happens to everyone.
Yeah, so in a way, we're all Kaospilots right now, and the question, the questions, I think, become more and more clear, and the challenges become more and more clear, and at the same time, it gets more and more clear that we do not have the answers yet. It's be very interesting to also talk to you in a few weeks' time and see how what answers you came up with and how things have developed your side. As a final note for this time of our conversation, one question we always like to end with is the question, how do you stay sane? Where do you find inspiration? And there's so much going on in the digital sphere, but maybe also at home. Is there a tip you can share, something to surf online or something else, some activity that you recommend and that you find inspiration in right now?
Yeah, so I find inspiration on a number of different levels, because if you look at my personal life, I save 2 hours per day now in logistics because I work from home. That amount of money, in theory, I can spend to increase my music projects that I'm actually are revisiting now after many years. So I do have 2 musical projects, and I can share with you what comes out of that, which is, it's both inspiring and it's interesting. It really triggers your creativity, regardless if you're fantastically good or not. The other thing is that regardless, I sit here right now and look out on my garden, and I have followed throughout these weeks as the flowers come into bloom. And it's interesting that that happens regardless of the pandemic. So there are certain things in our lives that are not necessarily affected in the same way. And indeed, ironically and a bit morbid perhaps, that are improved by challenges to our societies like this. And I find, I wouldn't say necessarily inspiration, but I find comfort in that certain things will continue, regardless of what happens to all of us. And so maybe that is something about comfort and something about inspiration. I will share you some links afterwards.
Thank you very much, Christer. It's great that you took the time in all these challenging questions that also you need address at Kaospilots to talk to me. And I'd be really happy to talk to you again in a few weeks and see how things have developed from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this is the end of today's edition of our podcast, Wie geht's? The Cultural Sphere during the coronavirus crisis. Over the next few days, I will be speaking to the CEO of ZKM, Karlsruhe's Center for Art and Media, and probably the #1 digital hub in Germany's art scene. Beat Vielmann, the artistic director of the Staatsphilharmonie Rheinland-Pfalz, will also be my guest, giving us an insight into what the coronavirus means for an orchestra. And Dirk Becker, a sociologist from the University of Witten-Herdecke, will help us try a second-order observation of what is going on right now in the arts and society. I'm looking forward to our next editions. Take care. Bis bald. Passen Sie gut auf sich auf.